Okay, thank you all for coming, especially on a nice summer day when you could be out doing other things. So I appreciate your spending the time here to listen to a lawyer talk about legal strategies. We've got a lot to cover today, but if you want to ask questions, feel free to interrupt me, stop in the middle. Couple of things that you should know. First of all, I want to thank the DaVinci Institute for hosting the event today. As many of you know, or maybe all of you know, that the DaVinci Institute really provides educational programs, including the DaVinci Coders, which provides some of the best web programming languages, and they provide other events like we're here today that relate to entrepreneurship. Your speaker today, and the topic is 10 strategies that will accelerate the growth of your business. So, who am I? I'm actually a business lawyer who is passionate about helping growth entrepreneurs to take their business to the next level by providing legal strategies that will protect their most valuable assets and avoid potential landmines. It's a little unusual. I need to give you a warning, though, because I am a lawyer, that today we'll be talking a lot about the law, but I won't be providing any legal advice. And I don't say this as a disclaimer. I say it because I want to set the stage for what we're really doing here. What we're talking about is legal strategies. And legal strategies are really applying legal knowledge. And I've been practicing law for about 27 years. So it's really applying 27 years of legal knowledge to business strategy. So what we're really talking about here is a different kind of business strategy. Today we're going to talk about the 10 legal strategies that will accelerate the growth. And we'll see how fast we can get this going. Now, I'm going to start with the 10 legal strategies so you don't think that I'm going to hold back until the end so that you have to be in suspense. So the first one is building a saleable business. The idea is that you really want to build a business that people would buy, and that there are a lot of legal issues that you need to address in preparing for the sale of a business, but this is probably the most important thing to do up front, and it's the first item we're going to talk about. You also want to make customers happy, and you need good customer agreements to do that. You need to claim your IP. Today, one of the most valuable components of almost any business is the intellectual property. So you need to make sure that you have proper rights to it and that you are not infringing anyone else's rights. You also need to build a team, which means personnel, employees, or independent contractors. And you need to leverage your business. So once you've built a business, you're making money. In order to grow it, in order to accelerate the growth, you need to look for ways where you can leverage the resources that you've created. Sixth is equity compensation. You can use equity or stock or membership interest, if it's an LLC, to incent personnel to grow the business faster. And raising capital. Raising capital traditionally has always been a source of fueling growth, a lot of legal issues around that, and there are strategies that you can develop for approaching financing. You also want to move your business online today. Most businesses have a website, but they may or may not have fully moved online, and the more that you do, the faster you're likely to grow your business, particularly if you do business over the internet. Protecting data is becoming one of the most important issues today because virtually all of our information is on a computer, and the information is transferred over public wires or wireless, which means that the information can get lost or there can be breaches in security of the data. And what's happening is there are more and more laws that are protecting or trying to protect the security of the data, and if there's a breach, it can be a setback for the company. This is really the one item that's not so much of an accelerant as it is a decelerant. So this is the one item that if you don't pay attention to, you'll slow down your progress. And the last one is finding the right partners. So these are the 10 strategies that we're going to cover today. Any questions? All right. Any strategies that you would like to see? Sorry? Number 9, protecting your data. Okay. Hopefully you want to see all 10, but that one in particular. Question for you. Since this is still very much a new area. There aren't a lot of lawyers out there saying they're offering legal strategies, and we're still trying to work on the messaging in terms of what will make this particularly appealing. So to the extent that you did wake up this morning and said, you know, there are 100 other things I could be doing, but I've decided to come here, is there something about what was in the information, the description of the program, or is there something about the legal strategies that compelled you to come today?
Yes.
Please.
So the vision I have for my business is ultimately to move it from being privately owned, sole source value right now, to literally on my death, if some kind of Futurist, something like brand vision for the business to have the business owned by the economists being rolled in. So employees, affiliates, associates of the business rather than having to be privately owned. Having to do with climate change, the concept is to pass ownership of solutions dealing with climate change from privatized or money-making things, something that people take ownership of. In a distributed economist kind of fashion. So getting from point A to point B, I haven't seen any legal strategies or business models for doing that, and I'm just trying to do everything. Does that make sense?
I think it does. So what I
all 3C, or even with all 3C?
Yes.
B certification and B Corp sort of thing, moving through that and even beyond, perhaps being what a typical all 3C is.
Okay, so there is a social good motive to building the entity that you're talking about, and you'd like it to be sustainable.
Yes.
And your stakeholders, particularly in the LC3 context, go beyond the traditional stockholders or managers or owners.
Absolutely.
And so your question is, or if it's a question, your interest is really to develop a strategy and to learn more about how you can create that.
Yes.
I'll try to touch on that. It is a new area, and we may not talk a lot about that specifically, but we can talk more, if not here, then afterwards. Any other specific interests in legal strategies? All right.
Right now, on the verge of making deals for our first 3-mile right-of-way acquisition and partnering with entities in Las Vegas. So I've been through Roger's really excellent legal strategies program with regard to our business, and it's excellent. And I'm just here kind of as a refresher for some of these that specific to some changes that recently occurred.
And
Can I interject? I've shared a little bit about myself and you have the other people who, when you say 3 miles of right of way, I'm a little bit lost in English.
this is a good time to do introductions. Daryl, would you like to start?
Okay, sure. Our company is called ET3. You might have heard of us recently on the news. Does that name ring a bell?
Are you involved in Skytran at all?
I know the founder of the company is no longer decision maker there for many years. In fact, I've given SkyTran presentations
Okay.
when he hasn't been able to be there. So I know SkyTran very well. Our company, ET3, stands for Evacuated Tube Transport Technologies.
Okay.
It's car-sized vehicles that are magnetically levitated, and they operate in a network of tubes that have all the air in them. So
Below ground or subsurface or subterranean? Or
only at very high speeds. Speeds above maybe 600 or 800 miles an hour in that range will need to be below ground, but it's at least 3 times the cost to go underground.
So when you say Las Vegas, are you involved with the innovation district there?
We've met with Zappos and been through Tony Shea's apartment and just in the last month.
Wow. Congratulations. That's great.
Yeah. So, there's, Vegas works out really well for us because there's 42 million unique visitors a year that come in there. And we met with Zappos on the way back from meeting with Elon Musk, who has announced his Hyperloop, and that's really propelled awareness of ET3 forward because there's been a lot of confusion attaching ET3 to Hyperloop when they're really different. It's a similar idea that Elon Musk has gone one step in the direction that we've been on, the pathway that we've been on for the last 15 years. And we have a consortium now of 288 licensees in 20 countries that are bringing this to reality. We're much farther along than most people realize. So
Wonderful. I'm so glad to hear it.
So what you were saying about what you're doing in green sustainability, save the planet stuff, is very resonant with what we're doing.
Well, let's continue with the introductions.
Yeah, Bob Williams, and kind of a serial entrepreneur, business person, and inventor. I've got a patent invention and a couple others sitting in the back burner. The timing is right. And I've certainly been following Daryl and running this program for a few years. And very excited about that as well. Just several different projects, and the legal aspects here is something you always can't learn enough of.
Man after my own heart. Vincent?
I'm Vincent, and I have a consulting business where I help manufacture equipment intended for the oil and gas industry to comply with regulations so that they don't blow things up.
Which industry? I'm sorry.
Oil and gas.
Oh, yeah.
So I specialize in helping manufacturers comply with regulations, standards, so that their equipment are safe.
Would you like to describe a little more of what you do?
Sure. Mike Schnatzmeyer, environmental design background, real estate development, architecture, construction. My passion has been having the city of Longmont re-envision their St. Vrain River corridor in a more sustainable, smart growth, new urbanist fashion, and that's finally gaining roots with an urban planning process that really just kicked off last night after 7 years of trying to get that started. So they hired an urban planner and it's funded and moving forward. It's about transforming a $250 million liability for the city of Longmont into a $500 million asset over the next 50 years. Kind of a long-range vision for that. So. But I also have, I'm really here to learn about legal strategies for growing an online e-commerce business focused around climate change and sustainability issues.
Well, great. So let's dig into some of these strategies. So we covered the 10, or I listed the 10 strategies that we're planning to cover today, and not knowing exactly what the audience had in mind. This tends to be the critical issues, but I think what you'll see as we go through them is not just, the strategies that we're going to talk about, but you'll hopefully think differently about building the businesses or growing the businesses that you have in ways where you start to apply legal strategies in the same way that you might apply business strategies. So with that, let me tell a little bit about myself. It's probably no surprise that I'm a lawyer. I don't know if it's the glasses or the shirt or the way I stand, but it's not a big surprise. I've been practicing law for about 25 years. Started out in Boston, worked with a couple of big firms, moved to Colorado about 4 years ago. And I had the experience along the way of working for a number of startups. I was president of a software development company where we created remote access products. We were the company to develop the first commercially supported networking application for dial-up for the Macintosh. So you could dial up with your computer, if you remember dial-up, using your Macintosh, and you could access your corporate network as well as the internet at the same time. And that was a big innovation at the time. Apple eventually came out with its open transport platform, and it took the business away. But we were a networking software company, and I learned a lot about building products and particularly about how to run small businesses. I also was involved and on the management team of two venture-backed software companies. One was called Delphi Forums, which was at the time one of the top 100 websites on the internet. And it was a company that was venture-backed and grew from 20 employees when I started to about 100 before the dot-com crash. I went from there to another company called Goldwire Technology, and Goldwire was also in the business of supporting the infrastructure to scale the internet, and also hit by the telecom bust, which happened about the same time. But all of these experiences really gave me a great opportunity to transition from the role of a traditional lawyer to being more of an entrepreneur. And I ended up thinking more like an entrepreneur, and coming out of it, I really took on the persona of being an entrepreneurial lawyer. What you may not know is that I also have a black belt in karate. And I'm kind of proud of that. I went from 0 to black belt in about 13 months. And I got to do some cool things. I got to teach 5- and 6-year-olds how to break a pine board. And if you ever want to have an impact or influence on a 5- or 6-year-old, teach them how to break a pine board. It's a great confidence builder. But there's also other things that they learn in the process. They learn a lot about strategy. Because if you're going to break a pine board, you have to concentrate a lot of your power or force into a very small area so that the board breaks. You need to cut the board the right way. You need to position the board the right way. You need to do a number of things that allow you to be successful at breaking the board at just the right time. And if you're not, you can break your arm before you break your board. So there's strategy in a lot of things that we do. But I got the pleasure not only of teaching 5- and 6-year-olds, but of other karate students, and I really developed an appreciation for teaching. And now we're moving into an education economy, a knowledge economy. And so my interest in teaching, or my experience of being a karate student first and then being in a school, which really was a teaching school. It was one that created a culture where once you learned something, you turned around and taught it to someone else. And that has stuck with me. And it's also been one of the things that I have appreciated. So I have this passion for sharing knowledge. I also have this talent or interest in creating vision and strategy. And these are things that are different than sort of most lawyers or standard lawyers, or that are not necessarily called for in the legal profession. that I've developed over time. But the legal profession is changing, and it's changing like most businesses are because of the internet, because of the economy, and just because of, I think, the attitudes. People want something different than what they used to. So the old model for the law firm has broken. And there's a new model which is emerging, which is one where lawyers are shifting from this role of what I call done for you, where if a client needed a document, they would call up a lawyer and say, can you draft that document and let me know where to sign? And they did that largely because they didn't have access to legal knowledge. The internet didn't exist 20 years ago. At least for the majority. It technically did exist, I know, because I was using it in college, but it didn't exist outside of the engineering world 20 years ago. And what's happened is that today anyone can get forms and information over the internet, and now the legal profession is a fairly open source. And that means that the role that lawyers play is changing. And so we've tried to embrace that by developing what we call legal strategies, where we've shifted from a traditional role of drafting documents and just doing it for the client to what we call done with you, and where we're helping the client or partnering with the client to develop legal strategies that will help to accelerate the growth of their business. And we've been doing it for about 3 years, where we've had no idea where we were going with it. We just started to say, well, what does it look like? What's the law firm of the future look like? In 2008, there was a book that was called The End of Lawyering, written by Richard Susskind. And so he was pretty much throwing down the gauntlet, saying to the legal profession that if you don't change, you will die. And so that prompted me to ask the question, well, if we need to change into what? And so we started down this path of first trying to package our knowledge in a variety of different ways, then trying to leverage technology, and then trying to figure out what this law firm in the future might look like. And what we came up with was legal strategies. What we also came up with is the fact that we're moving from a technology orientation into an information orientation. We are in the knowledge economy. Information and the internet has become a platform for sharing knowledge. And the primary container, or the primary thing that's being distributed over the internet, is information. And it forces all of us to think, how can we be more effective at sharing that knowledge and sharing that information using the web? So we're building information products. I also started a meetup called the Info Crowd, specifically for people who want to get to know or develop the skills that they need to build information products and then to market and sell them online. In the group, we identified at least 100 skills that you really need. Most of them we didn't have. We didn't know how to create videos. We didn't know how to market online. We didn't know how to do social networking. And so there's a lot to learn as we evolve into this new world. One of the other things that I created was this concept of a legal mastermind. It's taking this coaching and consulting and working with clients in a more proactive way as opposed to reactive. Rather than waiting for the phone to ring, actually helping clients to develop strategies and working with them more shoulder to shoulder in terms of growing their business. And we're just starting to come out and do more with it. So we've been doing these legal strategies one-on-one with clients and evolving and developing it and developing a series of tools, some of which you'll see today, and then taking those tools and now starting to refine them and create information products with them. So I started out calling myself an entrepreneurial lawyer. Had the experience of being on the inside of 3 technology-based companies, then came out, started a new type of law firm, and I'm now focused on information products. So I now call myself an infopreneurial lawyer. And that's the perspective that I'm going to talk from today. All right, so a lot of this, or really all of this, is really based fundamentally on strategy. So let me ask you, what's a strategy? We talk about it all the time. Everyone thinks they're good at strategy, which is why you can't really put on your card VP of strategy, because everybody wants to think that they're good at strategy, and they are. Everyone has a strategy, but what is it? Thoughts? What is it? How would you know a strategy when you saw it on a simple level?
It's envisioning a path from point A to point B to some future clear goal.
Okay, so visioning a path from point A to point B. I think that sounds great, yeah. So how do you know a good strategy from a bad strategy?
You get to point B, or somewhere.
Whether you get there, whether you get to point B, okay? Any other thoughts on what strategy is? Well, I looked it up on Google. Google said that strategy is a plan of action or a policy designed to achieve a major or overall aim. Sounded okay. It didn't really fill in my, didn't really answer any questions for me. It didn't tell me when I would be able to recognize it when I saw it, but it sounded right. So I started there, and then I said, well, I need to know what it is because I'm going to be selling legal strategies, so I have to know what it looks like. So I started to take it a little further. I said, well, one of the things you need is the goal. You got to go from point A to point B. So if you don't know you're trying to go to Paris and you start off in the direction of China, the chances of ending up in Paris are not too good. So you need a goal or some kind of a vision as to where you're going. You also need to generate some alternatives because there may be more than one path to get there. And you may, before you go over the mountains or under the river or wherever, you may want to decide which is the preferred path. And you need to set some priorities. And the priorities are going to be based on the criteria or the requirements that you really need in choosing which is the right path. And finally, you need that plan, which Google talked about. You need a plan of action that's going to actually implement the strategy that you've developed. So those are the 4 elements that we came up with. Does that sound right? So that's the criteria that we measure it by as to whether or not we have a strategy. So now, yes?
So, what's the difference between those alternatives, which when you have like different plans and plan?
Well, the alternatives, generating the alternatives might be, there may be 5 different ways to get to Paris. Over the mountains, by airplane, swimming. Those are the different alternatives that you want to consider up front. The plan, then you look at the priorities and in light of the criteria. You say, well, I want to get there within 3 days. That's one of the criteria. So swimming is not going to do it. So after you apply the priorities and criteria, you then narrow down the number of alternatives and you then create a plan that you're going to actually put into practice. So the plan is what you decide to do. And you may have a backup plan, but it's actually going through a process where you write down and then implement the plan. It's a plan of action. So then the question is, what's a legal strategy? Well, a legal strategy is a combination of business, law, and consulting. Business and law is obvious because you need a business strategy in order to have a good legal strategy. The law, you can't call it legal strategy without applying the law. But consulting is really all about this education and coaching and training, because the idea of a strategy is where you're partnering with the company or the client in developing, a plan of action. So, strategies can be bad, they can be good or great. How do you know which is which? So I took the liberty of defining it. A bad strategy creates unnecessary paperwork. It's hard to maintain, fails to achieve the primary objectives of the business, and wastes a lot of precious time and resources that could be better used elsewhere. A bad strategy is also like being a bad entrepreneur. The original definition of an entrepreneur is someone who moves resources from a lower productivity to a higher productivity. So a bad strategy is one that's wasting resources. We want to avoid that. So a good strategy is one that maximizes the legal dollars that are necessary to protect the most important assets of the business and takes precautions to avoid legal landmines. Does that seem reasonable? The idea being is if you meet that criteria, it's a good legal strategy. But what's a great legal strategy? A great one is one that actually accelerates the growth of the business. It crossovers that separation between law and business and says, we can actually create value. We can add value to the business. We can accelerate the growth of the business by a great legal strategy. Make sense? This is the reason why I'm passionate about it, is because it's pushing me, or the legal profession, to say it's not enough to understand the law. It's not enough to advise clients as to what the law is. But to be a great lawyer in the future, you need to be able to apply it in a way that will actually result or improve the results that the client gets. That's a performance test that didn't exist before. That's where we're going with it. So with a great legal strategy, here's the benefits. You can accelerate the growth of the business. You can also get paid twice. Now this is a notion that I learned from Michael Oleksak, who wrote a book called Intangible Capital, and I interviewed him a couple of years ago. He actually recognized that the world is changing, that companies, that 80% of the average business is intangible capital. It's intellectual property. It's not the way the old world was with the brick and the mortar, that if you wanted to figure out how much a business was worth, a bank would look at the physical assets of the business, the equipment, the furniture, the real estate, and then they would subtract the liabilities and they would figure out that's what the business was really worth. But today, with businesses like Google and Facebook, it's hard to say that the physical assets are the most valuable. And so Michael Oleksak came up with this notion that he said, look, if you improve your intangible capital, if you improve or create value in the business, you're really getting paid twice, because that business is going to be more profitable as it grows. And when you sell it, you're going to get more money for it because you've grown a more profitable business. So you get paid now while you're growing it, and then you get paid again when you sell the business. And that's an important thing, because it's hard to justify spending a lot of time as an entrepreneur in a lot of legal paperwork, in a lot of documentation, in a lot of what seems like tedious or assignments to maintain legal rights. And some rights you need to do and some you don't. And part of what we'll talk about is strategy, so we spend the time on the ones that are most valuable. But if you don't do it, then you lose the opportunity to get paid twice. And for a lot of owners, if you've ever read The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber, he talks about business owners that work in a business instead of working on a business. And the reason why they're always working in a business, they really just have a job, and sometimes it's a low-paying job because that business never acquires value. It's not saleable. And so it's really important to come from the perspective that the reason why you want a great legal strategy is because you want to create value in your business that will make the business saleable and increase that value when you go to sell it. The other benefit you get is that you avoid potential legal landmines. You could build the greatest business in the world, but if it's a small business and you get sued by one of the biggest businesses in the world, you may not see any return on your efforts. You may see the business go under, and your hope or dream of creating whatever reality for that business may be lost. So avoiding landmines can be as important as creating value. Another benefit you get is you get to take charge of your legal affairs. We started with this world where business owners really deferred to their lawyers. Tell me where to sign. What should I do? And now they're realizing, first of all, that the lawyers didn't have all the answers. They may have had the best answers in terms of interpreting legal information, but they may not have applied it in the business context. And having started out in a big firm, I remember very often lawyers either on our side or lawyers we were negotiating with would say, no, that's a business issue. We'll leave it up to the business people. So they didn't really take any responsibility or ownership. In fact, there was actually a disincentive for the lawyer to get involved in the business side of things, and they didn't have the training. That world has changed. So by acquiring or developing legal strategies, the business owner is really taking back control of the business. Also allows the business owner to negotiate with more confidence. One of the most common things we see is when the business owner goes to sell the business, they say, oh, I just got an offer to sell it and we've negotiated the price and we just need you to draft up the documents. And as soon as I start asking questions, I'll say, well, did you ask him about how to deal with the tax issue? And they say, oh, well, he asked me about it and I said it was okay. Well, at that point, it's hard to renegotiate. So, and some business owners will give away things without realizing it. Other business owners will just be a little cautious about it, and they'll miss opportunities when they could negotiate terms that would be more favorable. So this concept of a legal strategy empowers them to understand where the key issues are before they enter the negotiations. And then if they need help, we're always here, or a lawyer is always there to support them when they need help, but they can enter those negotiations with greater confidence. They can also maximize their legal dollars. I'm not saying that business owners shouldn't continue to have an outside law firm, but they can work with them more efficiently. They can direct them in terms of what they think is most important, and they can spend the dollars on those items that are going to provide the highest return on their investment. And it makes it easier to delegate. If you've got a strategy and you've articulated it, and ideally documented it, then you can hand it off to staff or outside personnel or outside counsel. And you're going to work more effectively with your lawyer. The results are going to be better. So this is the framework that we're starting with. So why don't lawyers want you to have a legal strategy? Well, they're not used to it. They know that they're not going to make as much money. They don't have experience in business, so therefore they don't know how to teach you or develop a legal strategy. They want to be in control of your legal affairs because that's what they're used to. And they don't realize, a lot of them don't realize the world has changed, but that reality is becoming more obvious every day. And they don't want you to take the work in-house. They don't want you to take the work that they used to do and bring it inside your company. And they don't want to partner with you. They're not trained to work with you. If you've ever gone to a website like WebMD and looked up your ailments and then tried to go in and talk to your doctor about what you read online, especially if you did it 5 or 10 years ago, they would look at you like you were an idiot and whatever you had to say, they weren't interested in. They've gradually started to change where they recognize that you're going online. And they're now more willing to partner with you, take the knowledge that you know and meet you halfway. Same thing's happening in the legal profession. So lawyers are reluctant to change. I like to say that they embrace trailing edge technology. They're really the last ones to jump on the bandwagon when it comes to innovation in a technical sense. And it's tough. The legal profession hasn't changed in the last 200 years. And now, for the first time, it's really forced to change in a big way. But it's coming. So, one of the things I like to do is read famous quotes, or ones that are inspirational. So I have a few quotes here today, and just to make it interesting, I want to see if you can guess who said these things. So, who said that innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower? Any guesses? Innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. You are right. Good answer. All right, so I've got another one for you. Who said this? Applying legal knowledge to business is not just about protecting assets, it's about creating value. I did. All right, we'll get into the strategy. So here's our first strategy. It's about building a saleable business. And The problem with building a saleable business is that you start out from the beginning and you don't necessarily know what it is you're trying to build, unless you have a clear plan or strategy in mind. So you know that you want it to get bigger, and you hope that will someday become a monument or this great thing that you can then sell or will run itself. But the question is, what's your strategy? Well, I'm going to talk about a few different strategies, but this is the biggest mistake most entrepreneurs make. They start a business without knowing where they're going. It's like that trip to Paris without knowing that they want to get there. How many people have a strategy for selling their business? Anyone? All right. How many people have a couple of strategies they're considering? More than one? Okay. All right. Good. Do you mind sharing one of your strategies? Just generically, how would you sell the business? Who would you sell it to, and what's the strategy?
Oh, well, I want to sell it, I want to grow it.
Sell what?
Were you talking about strictly selling, or what if I wanted to grow it?
You can grow a business. You don't have to sell. One of the fundamental sort of themes is that if you grow a business in a way that is saleable, in a way that would be attractive to buyers, you can sell it at any time, but you don't have to ever sell it. So it's a mindset more than anything else. But in order to pursue that mindset, and you never know, things happen in life. You grow a business and all of a sudden someone gets sick. One of the things that I do know is, I can't remember, I've been practicing law for 27 years, and I can't remember one time where the client planned to sell the business and sold it. Even if they were thinking of selling the business, they didn't have a plan. If what happens is usually this. They're out to dinner with one of their investors or someone that they know. The person writes something down on a napkin, puts a number on it, slides it across the table, and they say, "I'm interested in buying your business. Would you like to sell?" And they totally taken by surprise. And they had no idea it was worth that much, and they go, "Yes." Or the opposite. Suddenly the business runs into a cash flow problem. They can't meet payroll. They've got to find somebody who will bail them out. Or the business loses viability and they have to shut it down. And they want to sell off the assets and get whatever they can. None of those are planned events, and they always come up on very short notice. So if you're going to plan for the sale of a business, you have to start planning before you think you're going to sell it, because by then it's too late, and very few, if any, business owners actually plan. So I'm not sure I answered Bob's question, but or responded. Yeah, well, so this is a strategy. So you want to have more than one strategy because you don't know exactly how you're going to sell it. So we're going to talk about what those strategies look like and actually put them down. So here's one strategy. It's called targeting your ideal customers. And in this strategy, what you want to do is you want to identify your 10 best customers in the industry. You then want to involve the customers in the design process. So you may start bringing them into the process from the very beginning. And this is a real strategy. This was done by a fellow by the name of Greg Ehrman. He started a company called Waypoint Software, one of the early companies to do e-commerce in a big way. He wanted to be a CEO. He's a first-time CEO, and he started his business saying, I'm going to target the 10 best companies in the industry as customers, the best customers, whoever could use this e-commerce product. And he went to them at the specification stage, not even at the alpha stage or the beta stage. He went to them and he showed them the specifications and he said, what do you think? But he got the buy-in of the 10 best companies to help him design it. It's much easier to change software or any product you build at the design stage than it is at the production stage. So he started with the specifications, and he figured out which are the must-haves and which are the nice-to-haves. And the must-haves are the critical items that have to be built into the product or the customer won't buy. The nice-to-haves is it's nice, but it's not necessary. Customers pay money for the must-haves, and if there's one must-have that's missing, they won't buy at all. So he figured it out at the design stage, but he didn't just figure it out with one company. So he took the 10 best. And if you can get 8 out of the 10 best to say, yes, I'll buy that, then you go off and build it. And that was his strategy. And so he built a product that he knew his customers wanted to buy. Seems simple, but so very few people do it. And then he got the customers to pay for the development of the product because they really wanted it. It was a critical must-have. He didn't have to fund the development. They paid for it. And he was able to develop the relationship, the customer relationship. It wasn't he built the product and he said, oh, let me see who I could sell it to, and then develop the relationship. He was developing it all the way through the specifications, the alpha, the beta, and then the product launch. Well, he had great results. So if the 10 best customers buy the product, then you know that the industry will also follow. That gets people excited about the business you've created. And what that means is it made it very easy for him to sell this company in only 9 months. And this is a long time ago. I think it was about $4 million because I heard him speak, but this goes back to about 1997. So today, the numbers, I'm sure, would be much bigger if it was a hot company. But for him, a first-time CEO, 9 months in business, to sell the company for $4 million at that time, that was a huge success story. And he actually was disappointed. He says, I wanted to be a CEO. I didn't get much of a chance to do it. So he started another company, which he grew to a much bigger number. But the investors, that company produced 1,278% return for the investors when it was sold. I looked that up, I don't know where it came from. But he created a successful business that not only gave him a track record as a first-time CEO, which made it easier for him to raise money for the second company, but it also, he did well by his investors, which of course made them want to invest in his next venture. So that's one strategy. So do you get the idea of how a strategy can help to create a saleable business? That's one strategy. We're going to talk about 2 or 3 of them. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this than some of the others. And Steve, will you let me know when we need to take a break? Thanks. But because I'm going to spend a little more time on this, because this is probably one of the most important things. If you don't have a good exit strategy or an idea of how you're making the business saleable, then everything else that you're doing is going to not be as effective at growing the value of the business or allowing you to get a return on your investment. The biggest investment you're putting in is your time, and you want to get a return on it, and the way to do that is to build something that is saleable. So here's another strategy. This one is about targeting your ideal acquirer. So before we were talking about targeting the best customers, but they weren't going to buy the business. The investors or the company that bought that business was Open Market, which was a publicly traded company. They weren't the customer, but they bought the company because they had the ideal customers. In this strategy, you really target the companies that you want to acquire you. And you can do that by looking at the 10 best companies for acquisition. You say, who might want to buy this business when I've created it? And you want to align your products with their needs. I hear a lot of time clients come in and they say, oh, I'm in the, I'll just pick any industry, the IT industry, Microsoft will buy me. Well, and I stop them usually right there. I say, well, wait a minute. I know you're in the same industry, but let's look at their product strategy and your product strategy, and are they aligned? Because they really don't, do databases. They do software. So if you're going to count on them to acquire you, you want to be realistic about what their business objectives are, and then you want to cultivate them. So you want to create a relationship with those acquirers in order to sell to them. You also want to look for opportunities to deepen that relationship. So you might, early on, you might not have anything that they're interested in, but you may be able to help them. You may be able to offer them some support. Maybe you do some technical documentation, or there are a lot of different ways to help a potential acquirer. And you can do that with more than one company. If you're offering to help, no one's going to complain usually. You can also position your business to be on their strategic roadmap. So it's also important to maintain more than one acquirer. Anytime you're selling a business, if you only have one buyer, it's hard to get the full value of your business because they don't have an incentive to pay full value and they know it. So a good example of this was baby Einstein and the founder, Julie, I'm probably not going to pronounce her name right, but Ainer Clark, I think. She spoke here and she talked about her story, and then I looked it up online, and she started Baby Einstein, but you could tell from her story that she was out there courting relationships with companies that might acquire her. She was creating these videos for children and started as a video production company, and then targeted, I think, the retail chains that were most likely to be able to distribute them, and then targeted companies like Disney that were able to then, had a market, a similar market, and this was aligned with it. Disney did end up, it was a strategic partner long before they acquired them, and then Disney did end up acquiring them, and this says, 20 plus million because I'm guessing it was private information. I think I saw some report that suggested that the business may have sold for 400 million. I don't know what take the founder would have gotten, but significant dollars when you're courting a company like Disney. Now, she could have just been another video production company and tried to sell tapes out of the back of her car, but instead she aligned her business with a bigger acquirer. So this is the second strategy. Sound good? Questions, comments? You get the idea now why we're talking about strategy? Okay. So here's a third one. This one I call the fast track PR launch. This was actually a client of mine, and in this case, they identified a hot market. These are like two kids coming out of college. Smart kids, but they've never been in business before, but they identified a hot market. And this goes back a few years. In this case, it was photo sharing. All of a sudden, everybody was sharing photos on the internet, and every major website needed to have a photo sharing application. So they decided to create one. So they designed a product that really addressed the need. And then they launched a beta version. Now, they spent their own money. They raised friends and family money, not that much, but enough for them to live and to develop this product, probably around, 100,000 or, not much more or less. But part of that money they used for one specific purpose that I had never seen a client use it for. They used that money to invest in PR. Now, here was a product, they were doing a photo sharing application. There were lots of people doing them at the time, but it was hot. They had never been in business before. They allocated something like, $25,000 or $30,000, which was a big part of their budget. They had no sales coming in. They had no strategy for monetizing this application because it was all about eyeballs back then. It was all about getting people on the site, and then somehow you were supposed to make money from that later on. And they actually didn't even get that many people to sign up for their beta when they had it, because a big part of the valuations were the number of subscribers and how fast were the subscribers growing. And they had a relatively small number of subscribers. But they did this press release, this launch, and they made sure that it got in front of the biggest companies, the Googles and the big publicly traded internet companies. And they ended up getting several offers for an early stage acquisition. And they got one offer from a publicly traded company that wrote them a check that was, it was really unusual because it was the kind of check that you'd get for an investment as a venture capitalist. And they were at the stage that their other choice was, I got this great application like Facebook, I'll go get some venture capitalists to invest. Well, you don't get any money out when the venture capitalists invest. The typical venture capital investment at that time was like $5 million. In fact, that's how, when the buyer said, well, if they needed to pick a price for this company, it had been around, for a year only because they were developing software, but it hadn't been in business. And they didn't have any really good way to benchmark it. You could look at the amount of time that they took to develop the software, 2 college kids for a year. And so, how much is that worth? Well, that would, might be $100,000. That wouldn't excite the entrepreneurs. So they said, well, what would a typical venture capitalist invest in it? And they took that number and used that as the benchmark for what they were going to pay for this company. Now, again, it was like Greg Ehrman's story where they had been in business for a very short period of time. They had a chance to cash out, not raise money and hope that they're going to have a cash out somewhere down the line and take the risk of being diluted. They actually cashed out. So that was another strategy. It was a strategy I'd never seen before, which worked extraordinarily well. And they went on to start other companies, but they spent a few years there with the publicly traded company before they did that. Now, in the process, so they were acquired by a publicly traded company. In the process, we ended up doing another strategy issue because their offer was to give us stock in addition to cash, half stock, because they wanted to tie. The reason why they were buying that company, why does a publicly traded company buy this application? Was the application that good? Well, they couldn't tell. It wasn't like the subscribers. The reason why they bought that company at that time was because the application was because the engineers created a user-friendly application. They could tell that that application was just easier to use than what their engineers were doing. And they couldn't, at that time, user experience was not well known or appreciated. And you couldn't hire engineers that were willing to pay attention to the user experience. Or if you did, they were already hired and they were hard to retain. So what they did was they were really buying a team of engineers that knew how to incorporate user experience. But they wouldn't have happened without that press release. And that's why they paid big dollars to get it. The other interesting strategy that came up with that company was that when they got the stock was restricted. It was a publicly traded company, but the shares were not publicly tradable. And they partly wanted them to hold on to them for a year so that they stuck around. They didn't, they wanted the team to stay with the company. And we ended up having to figure out, and it was also at a time where that we'd gone through the dot-com bust. And so the idea of selling out your company and having a lot of the value tied up in stock and then having the value go down in 6 months or a year wasn't very appealing. So we had to develop a strategy on how to lock in the value, and we did it by working with the trading desk on Wall Street that was willing to give us a guarantee, what they called a cashless collar. And not to go into all the gory details, but it was an interesting problem that we managed to solve, which was how to take a restricted stock position and guarantee that those funds would be available a year from then when the stock became tradable. All right, last strategy, or should we pick it up after break? All right, last strategy, and then we'll take a break. This one's called riding the technology wave. So in this case, there are a couple of examples of this. This is typically a fast growth company. This is one where you know, when there's a technology wave, there are usually a lot of investors buying into that technology wave. We've seen it many times. We saw it with the dot-com boom. We saw it with the telecom boom. There's usually a bust after it. But what happens is a lot of investors become, or venture capitalists become visionaries. Instead of investing on fundamentals, they're investing in the vision that this is going to be the next great technology. So they might invest in, ET3's transport system, or Elon Musk's if they decide to take one that's not as well thought out. So this idea of riding a technology wave is really leveraging the resources that you have to the max, because the wave isn't going to last forever. So here's an example where this is back in around 2000, and maybe it was 1999 or before the dot-com bust, but that first wave. And this was typically an IT technology services company. Those never had significant value before. They were just service companies. They were systems integration. But the technology that they were working in was so hot that people wanted a piece of everything. And so what they did was they leveraged their service company. They would say, well, we're going to integrate this, we're going to create things. I went to some of their demonstrations, and they'd show these PowerPoints, and they put up a PowerPoint of the slide, and they say, oh, wouldn't it be great? Well, you can get your phone and your fax and your internet all from one place. And they would show this nice interface where you could do that. But they hadn't built it. It didn't exist. Unified messaging. But they sold the dream, and everybody wanted to get a piece of that. So they grew this business pretty quickly. They hired a lot of people. They did a lot of technology consulting, but they were leveraged to the max. They were always 1 week away from missing payroll and scrambling to keep the company going. But each time it kept getting bigger. They maximized revenues, they leveraged their resources, and they really accelerated the growth, mostly by borrowing. They were in a position of dominating a market. Why? Because in a hot market, if you can get bigger faster than the next guy, then you're the leader. You're going to be the prime target. So they took it to the point where it's a service company, an IT service company, and they took the company public. And they got $1 billion valuation on the market. And this was public information. The owner was able to cash out for $120 million. They went from startup to IPO in 3 to 4 years. That company also went bankrupt, I think, within, I don't know what it was, a year after the went public. Most of the people who had stock in it didn't get their money out. So it was a very limited window, and he threaded the needle. I've never seen anyone do it, as close and come out as well. But those are 4 strategies, each of which is different. And you don't want to just have one. You want to have more than one, but you want to think about which one, because a lot of them are different paths. If you're a fast growth company trying to take the company public, that's different than the other 3 strategies that we talked about. So you can't do them all. You can have more than one if they're complementary, but you can't do them all. But those were all successful, and they were successful because the founder had an idea of how they were going to do it, and they were willing to commit to it. Make sense? So now's a good time to take a break.